Hello, hello, everyone. I just want to check in with you and make sure everyone can see me clearly from here. Are we good? There's a few things before I start. Let's say, well, I don't like the interpreters having to interpret for the interpreter. So if you want to make a comment, please stand to the side or at the front so everyone is able to see your sign language and there's no shadow needed. And I'm going to talk to you about what we're going to do. I'm going to let the interpreters voice for me. I'll let the interpreters do the sign language. Just go ahead and do your best to sign or do your best to voice, whichever you prefer to do, and that would be great. And then we can avoid the drama of doing both. And, I'm going to try to model that. I'm going to teach by example. So you'll see what I do and what I do with clients, and we'll explain that. For first, how are you all doing? Are we great? Are we good? You're glad to be here? You're happy to be here? Thank you so much for coming to this workshop. I'm so happy that you're here, and you are an important member of the audience, and I respect all of you. You mean so much to me. I value your opinions, and if you want to have any discussions with me, please do. This is a safe zone, no judgment here. I hope we can all agree on that. Here's some key points to remember. If you disagree or whatever, this is just who I am, so you'll just have to accept me and my presenting style. As clinicians, you have your degrees, and I'm not going to go into detail about everything because you are already professionals. So if you are behind on something, that's okay. I can go into a little explanation, but I expect you to know what DBT is, right? We know dialectical behavioral therapy. I don't need to explain the theory, right? I hope I see more heads nodding that you understand DBT. Also, sometimes it's very hard when we're like from Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. I watched the interpreter, saw she struggled with that sign for that. St. Louis, Missouri, we sign cochlear implant like this, and some people do CI, and some people bend their fingers when they sign it, and it doesn't matter. If you sign it different or I sign it different, I don't mean any offense to the way I'm signing it. And this is the BJC, Behavior Health Experience. This is not research-based. You may take other workshops that are research-based, and I honor those. Those are amazing workshops. But here is like we're out on the front lines. We're doing the work, and everything we do is messy and dirty, and that is exactly what we're talking about here. I'm not playing with you here. This is the nitty-gritty. So I don't have all the answers. I can give you some ideas. We can have some discussions. But really, I can't guarantee that my teaching method is the only way and it's what's approved and going to work for your clients. Your states are different. The people you're working with are different. Your administrators are different. Your government is different. Some of these suggestions will work and some of them won't, so take away what you can. Think about things as you're going home, about different ways that you can set something like this up in your community. Just have a good time with the information. We'll have a little question and answer time. And, I hope you're going to ask serious questions about things that are going to be helpful. We're here to share information. And if you have something you can share, please do. Don't hold back. Share what you have and information. This is a new territory for me as well. So, when I first set up the program, I'm learning too. If you want to stand up, that's fine. You don't have to be miserable sitting in your chairs the whole time. Do what you need to do. If you have to go to the bathroom or you need to if you want to stand where you are, go to the wall. Just make sure everybody can see you where you're standing. Let us know your name and where you're from. Like, I'm Irvin, and I'm from St. Louis. And here's my question. Can we all agree to do that? I think that makes sense, right? We're going to talk about a lot of different topics. We only have 90 minutes, well, 85 now. So I just have this limited time to cover all these subjects. And really, I could do this all day. So, I'm going to try to cover them pretty quickly and briefly for the sake of time. And we do have a timekeeper who's got their eye on me. So, I also have a camera in this room. So we need to behave. So I wanted to talk about MOAD and the Missouri Department of Mental Health, as well as the BJC-BH Deaf Services team that was established in 2010. We started Deaf Services. We're also going to talk about the SLPRC, the St. Louis Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center, and I have somebody here to help me talk about that. Someone here from that program. This is Josie. I always forget your name, Sign. I'm sorry. Josie is amazing, and she can explain her role later. And then the person next to her also is Dave Kingbury. And if he could also stand. He's the director, right? The director of Deaf Services under the Department of Mental Health. Thank you guys so much for your support of BJC Mental Health. So after we get through all of this information, then we'll start talking about how we teach the IMR. So MOAD, the deaf people were concerned about mental health issues. We've noticed that many deaf and hard of hearing people were not receiving services, or they would get interpreters, or maybe they wouldn't get interpreters. And I know many of you have experienced that in your own towns. But MOAD won against the Missouri Department of Mental Health. And my agency had already started by, after a town hall meeting, people had gone to this town hall meeting and expressed some concerns. And there was an agency who had invited some very important people to come, and they listened to this, and they really realized that deaf people's perspective. They saw their stories, and they were appalled. And so I know, it happens everywhere all the time, and they didn't know. And this hearing officials didn't realize what was happening to our community. And they weren't intentionally trying to discard us as people, but they were trying to figure out how they could take care of the deaf people. Deaf people maybe weren't making a loud enough stink for them to notice. So the MOAD suit made people take notice and realize that they needed to make some changes. So they decided to take notice, and they set up the St. Louis Psychiatric Center, and they provided funding as well as video conferencing. Let's say we had deaf people who were far away. We were able to sit in front of some kind of video conferencing service, and we could sign with them. So we wouldn't have to drive the 2 or 3 hours to get to those rural areas who needed mental health services. So we could sign through some kind of video device. Oh, I'm going to fall off the stage. So the video technology was great, and we did have some challenges with that. So after we were trying to hire clinicians, we didn't want to just hire anyone. somebody who just knew how to sign the alphabet was not going to work. We needed to make sure they could pass a sign language proficiency exam and some other things to make sure they were qualified. So those things were put into place. And our goal really is to just continue working into the future and have a deaf residential facility for clients, and so people could come live within a community. And so that's something we're just dreaming about for the future. The Deaf Services team includes Laura, who was supposed to present with me today but was not able to come. She's in St. Louis. And then myself and the other community support services worker, Bridget, who works making appointments and does some just pretty basic work with us. And then Sarah Pritchell is a co-worker, and she's working with a hearing team right now. She supervises a hearing team. So we said goodbye to her, unfortunately, for now. And this is who you have, is me. So Sarah is also my IMR co-worker and originally worked on IMR with me. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I went to grad school, and I know a few of you from there. And my resume is pretty much up here on the screen. I have dialectical behavioral therapy, and I've done DBT skills groups, and I co-facilitate those. We have 4 deaf and 4 hearing people. It's very interesting. Deaf people love co-facilitators who sign. Like I'll lead the group and we'll discuss various topics, what they've learned, emotional management, and as a deaf person to be able to give stories and make it apply. And then we usually have a hearing person. A couple weeks ago, things had been going along just fine, and then one of those people got upset and walked out. They were just totally pissed off, and they left the room. And we tried to figure out what happened. But they felt like they were being discriminated against as hearing people because we had this group of 4 deaf and 4 hearing. And they felt like because I was signing and telling our stories that it was more focused on the deaf people. And the deaf people were really happy with how it was going, but I guess the hearing people were feeling the disparity. And so we had to try to figure that out by integrating both, mainstreaming per se, the hearing and deaf people. And so we started to realize maybe it would be better to have just a deaf group and everyone with the ability to sign. When they have an interpreter, then everything's a little bit behind. You miss the communication. And so I realized it wasn't really working with an integrated group, unless maybe it was a hearing person or a deaf person who had grown up in the other culture, then maybe it could work that way. But if they weren't able to sign, it really didn't seem like it worked because we were trying to focus on ASL and providing the supports and validating their experiences. And then the hearing people felt like we weren't validating their experiences. Even though I had a hearing co-facilitator, they still looked at me as kind of the main facilitator of the group and didn't feel like it met their needs. So DBT. And then the IDDT, the integrated dual disorder treatment. So people who have mental health issues as well as substance abuse issues. There were a lot of problems with providing and delivering services to deaf and hard of hearing people. And this is just my information, so just trust me on this. Are you satisfied with my resume that I know what I'm talking about here?
Okay, so now I'm going to explain about instructing with taught IMR. It was taught at the hospitals with a subgroup. It was a statewide run inpatient program. And the Department of Mental Health are the ones that really help to support that in Missouri and help create that. And they had a diagnosis of 1 on the axis. The primary, but not exclusively forensic. I signed this for forensic. I don't know what you might sign. You might use interview analysis for forensic, but I'm going to sign this for forensic. And sometimes client will have legal guardians that will place them, or they might be court ordered. Like Dr. Lama was just explaining, and another presenter earlier this morning was explaining, it's a similar concept. They're not able to understand the court or participate in their own defense, and so they have a placement. And we see if there's any improvement in understanding what they did and what the consequences were for their actions, or if they need to be placed long term. And sometimes it's not successful. They may need to be placed somewhere else, and they might be placed somewhere else, and they fail at each of their different placements, then they might be returned because they might try all these different resources, residential programs, group home, and they just aren't able to succeed, then they'll be placed in the SLPRC. Right, Josie? All right, great. Just want to check in. So legal guardians, or they might be court ordered to be placed here. I sign this as placement because that's more like what happens. You get put into placement. Is that your experience? What is your sign for that? Oh, not voluntary. It's a nice way, or willing, or not willing to be admitted. So thank you. Appreciate for the sign options for that word. So what the SLPRC looks like, I'm going to kind of paint a picture for you. You know, Josie's deaf, she signs. We've got the team leader who's a deaf sign language user. There's also deaf support worker. We've got several individuals that sign, they grew up signing ASL. And then you've got a hearing person who's new to signing, they're learning ASL. We've got all of these different people involved. And when we hire a support worker or a technician, they have an option to work with a deaf population or the general population. And some people who are hearing don't like to work with the deaf population, and we respect that option, that choice, that's fine. If they're interested in working with the deaf population, then we welcome them into the fold. But they're required to have familiarity with deaf culture. They have to be able to understand the deaf person's needs. They're encouraged to develop an intimate knowledge of people outside of the hospital, because healthy people, they can see healthy people, and then when they come in, they can recognize a deaf individual who does not have healthy needs like the ones that they experienced on the outside. If all they see are the illnesses, then they think that's the tendency. So we want them to have the comparison of the two populations, because that gives them a tool that they can rely on to recognize it's not just deaf culture, it's a behavioral issue or a mental health issue, and it's not specifically related to deafness. And that helps them in a place of teaching position. Also interpreters, we've got some champ interpreters, some amazing interpreters that are involved, and they're involved with the language and explain how the language works. They take the time to really analyze linguistically what would work, what doesn't work, and we've got an awesome team of interpreters that are involved with the SLPRC. So this is kind of what it looks like as far as our group who teaches IMR. IMR is Illness Management Recovery, and the acronym is IMR. So we have 6 participants that were invited. They were not forced or ordered to participate because they were behaving badly or anything like that. That wasn't the case. It wouldn't work if that was the case. If they weren't following the rules and I said, you have to go to counseling, that would not work because it gives them the wrong message. We we invite them to participate. We explain what the benefits would be. It would help you think more positively, and would you like to do that? And they sometimes think, that they think it's cool because they have the power to join or not. They feel empowered and confident. So there's 4 different levels of functioning in one group. You had 2 from a residential school, 2 that had no academic knowledge. Maybe they went to school, but there was no record in our system or in the Missouri system. No one knew if they actually attended school or not. And they grew up with no communication. Their family just let them do just let them do what they needed, wanted. And then they got in trouble with the law, and so they were brought into the system. 2 clients had a similar diagnosis, and there were 4 that had very different diagnoses. So we have to meet their needs. We had to think about like deaf positive and have them be able to see each other, a deaf friendly environment. So looking at how the environment could be set up so that everybody could see each other. If they weren't aware that person was signing, it was like, okay, we got to back up a second because they couldn't see. So I had to actually take a few steps back. And I'm not talking to you. Okay, you can see over here, and make sure that everyone had access. It was tough. It was a challenge. And if you notice that person was just staring off and didn't really care, because a lot of people just kind of would proceed, that's what they're used to doing. And so we would stop and check in with the individual. Can you see me? Okay, and we continually check in to make sure that the person is engaged. And that person started to get upset or feel inspired because they felt more inspired because they were checking in and they knew that we wanted them involved, and pretty soon they were doing that on their own. They started making comments and became very participatory. And sometimes people just didn't appreciate that. So that's why I always check in with you to make sure that you're understanding, you're comprehending, and there's no barriers here in the room, so that I'm getting some head nods, so that's great. That's perfect. And if you raise your hand and you sign something that was way off the point, I'd be like, okay, let me get some feedback from you and ask for maybe a different sign, and I can get some input from you. So that's why I always ask for feedback. Sometimes I'm signing too fast or too big, or I need to tone it down a little bit. I need to reduce my signing space. Something like that is okay. It's not me. It's not my class. I'm there for them. It's for their benefit. And so I'm not on display. Here, everybody look at me. It's the Irvin show. But when you're signing, I start getting into it, and I'll just start throwing signs out there, which can be very dangerous because it can be very overwhelming to the participants. And they could be linguistically challenged and just zone out like a deer in headlights as I'm communicating. And they'll be, who does this person think he is? So I had to realize that, okay, what works for you may not work for that person, and I won't do that. Okay, so does this slide, any questions about this slide? Everybody got an understanding of this one? All right, great, let's move on. This is time to brag about our program. SLPRC was established in 2012. Is that right, Josie? 2011. Okay. So it was established in 2011. And Deaf Services. So it was in 2011. The Deaf Services team was established. And as I explained about the Moab lawsuit, was the reason behind it. And then in 5 years, we've only had to use restraints one time. That's before Deaf Services was set up. There was oftentimes restraints were used. Oftentimes a person would be restrained by one hand, so they had to sign with one hand, which was a communication barrier. And since we started, we only had to do restraints once. And that meant staffing, and we had 4 staff. Over 5 years, there was 4 stabilizations. And that's a big deal. It shows that we have communication. The communication access is working. It works. And that's why we need people who are proficient in deafness and are certified, proficient, qualified communicators in sign language. It works. I'm happy if it's a deaf group and there's improvement and I lose my job, that's fine. I'm okay with that. That's perfectly fine with me. Really tried to encourage the community to take off on their own. There was one that didn't work and they returned to us. There was another, for advocacy reasons, that moved to a very rural area and felt that the communication was not there. And this person felt very safe and wanted to move back because there was a team of people that supported them who could sign. The administration was signing. Even the executive team could sign or was learning sign language. And this was a much better place for this individual to be. They moved out to an area where they had no resources, and it re-scarred this individual again or traumatized them again. And so we had to work with them again and find a residential program that would have the cultural accommodations for this individual. Right, Dave? It worked? And it's a progress. It's a work in progress. It's not easy, right? Yeah, we have to try. You got a lot of bureaucracy, red tape, funding you got to go through. Not a lie, right? You all know. It's interesting. We had no women placed. Wonder about that. I don't know why. But we had no women placed. In the past, we did have a woman. But over the last many years, we have not. Before we taught IMR, clients had already received video relay or video conferencing services, and they learned to sign. It was a 1-year individual counseling session before starting in the group sessions. And I don't know if that made a difference, having one-on-one interaction, and that provided or prepared them for group interaction. I don't know if they didn't have that, if they wouldn't succeed. I hadn't thought of that before, but that might be a contributing factor. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So IMR, do you incorporate IMR in your agencies? Yeah, you're familiar with that. Okay, great. I know another person over here is familiar. IMR, illness management recovery, is an evidence-based practice or instruction method, and that is why it's important that it's evidence-based. You've got it there, it's prepared so that you can teach it. DBT, similarly, is evidence-based. It's already been established. But that did not necessarily agree with IMR. We chose to go with IMR because it fit with the client's interests and accommodations. For me, this is reading at a college level. There's a lot of information involved. And so you can copy the URL so that you can bring it up and look at it for free. You have it all there accessible to you with all of the instructions and everything. Sarah, my co-facilitator, and I flipped through the numerous pages and we're like, the deaf people don't have any time for this. We looked at it and we're like, wow, there is a lot. It's a lot of good information. It's great. But we realized that it wasn't really accessible. We went to a hearing IMR group and we went to study their methods. And we would go at different times during different times of the day. And we realized that the hearing did understand, but it didn't seem like they were educated. Like some had graduated high school, some had, and the comprehension was good. But looking around, I still thought for the deaf population, those that were language deprived, language challenged, or whatever sign you want to use, this wasn't going to work. So I started asking around to different agencies, one in California, one in Philadelphia, one in DC. I would ask, and no one, I couldn't find anybody that knew about IMR. So we had to come up and create it from scratch. So when we originally started, we realized that we had to expose people to the IMR, and you might take what you gained from it and develop something and add on to it and modify it and make it easier to teach. And that's the idea. That's the concept that we're promoting.
And to become a co-facilitator, you need to have some specific training in some very specific topics and areas. Any questions about any of that slide? Yeah, please. But say your name and where you're from, please. I'm from Minnesota. And then maybe I'm jumping ahead, but as far as accommodations or adjustments, did you do that, or did you develop all of the things on your own? So exactly right. So this is the first time I'm sharing our results, because this was a brand new step that we took. And I'm not sure, maybe you're jumping ahead, maybe you already have something that I wasn't aware of. But how do we make it accessible for people working in the field? Because, you can't blame me if I started something and everybody was already doing it and I just didn't know. Nobody communicated with me, right? So yeah, today I'm going to explain more about all of these topics here. Other questions by anyone? Okay, hold on, time out. Do me a favor. Please stand up when you're commenting. Oh, no. Everyone stand up. I'm going to ask all of you to do something. Maybe you won't like this. You might not like it at all, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. Ready? When you do this, you're going to get something good out of it. Are you ready? Maybe you should put your paper and pen down. It might help you. Okay, I want you to loosen up. I want you to shake it out. Okay, shrug your shoulders. Do a little chicken dance. Raise your hands. And now you can go ahead and sit down. So how are you feeling? You feel a little inspired, a little ready to go? That's what we do. When you all look like you're going to pass out, I'm like, okay, everybody up. I can't teach and present while they're like that. They won't learn a thing. They will appreciate it if it's something fun, if we get them motivated and excited. If I show excitement and interest, they'll come along with me. Let's say I'm presenting anger management. These behaviors are not acceptable. You need to learn how to use hot and cold. Where is your hot? No, that's not going to work for anyone. You've got to feel comfortable. You've got to open up. And people with language challenges don't understand just regular, linear stories, right? Like a formal register story. They are like, this is my need. This is what I want to be in. I want something that motivates me. I want to participate. They don't care about us and our systems and our levels of diagnosis and all these things. So that's how I approach it. That approach is the key to seeing results. I thought, I'd push the interpreter to change the slide. All right. So here's the average or the topics that we usually will cover. And I'd like to ask you which do you think we have eliminated from this list? Do you think we teach all of these topics? So I have someone saying keep all of them. And you're saying getting rid of the last one. Remember, there are people with language challenges. Language proficiency is delayed. Whatever sign you guys like to use for language delays and language deprivation. So what else could we take off, do you think? Okay, the stress vulnerability model, perhaps. Anything else? The second one? You think, oh, that's interesting view. That's an interesting idea. What else do we have? Reducing relapse. Okay. Let's see. So we kept the things here in bold. And you're right, we took out that bottom one. Yeah, because the legal system was taking care of that for them. We couldn't really control what was happening. We couldn't really get into that, so we took that one off. And these other two we also eliminated. You know, most of them that we were working with didn't have drug issues, and relapses we weren't really talking about. So we were talking about what do things mean? What about this medicine? Let's say you have anxiety medicine, or we would encourage them. We would have, we would, instead of saying the names of medicines, we'd say, that yellow pill, that little one, or that we'd describe the different medicines and what they're for. We say, oh yeah, that yellow one, that one is for when you're hallucinating or when you're thinking about things that aren't there. And then, we talk about taking the medicine and how maybe it would help you focus and come back to reality. And so we would explain, they'd say, oh, I really need that medicine. Now I know why. As far as social supports go, a lot of people who are in a hospital or prison have boundary issues. There are rapists, and there are people who have been involved in harassment. And, for example, a client would say, this is my interpreter. This is my interpreter. We're like, no, the interpreter's here for everybody. And they would say, no, this interpreter is my interpreters. So this person's my friend. They're my friend. Or perhaps someone is the same race. They would say, well, this is my person. I have to work with this person. And they wouldn't let that person go home when their shift was over even. So these are issues that we would have to talk about, boundary issues. And how to make these visual explanations about boundaries. Suppose my coworker and I were together, and let's say we did a role play. And I'm going to use our PowerPoint person for an example. I'd stand in front like this. Look, what does her face look like right now, right? What's her facial expression telling us? Oh, she likes me. It's not working. Oh, gosh. I need to find somebody else who can be annoyed with me. All right, let's watch her face now. What happens? Do you think she likes me? Do you think she likes me in her face like this? Or maybe she's not comfortable. So if you look at someone's face, you can see that they're uncomfortable, and we would have to do these role plays for them to understand. Let me get out of this slide. So can everybody see me okay over here? So we have these skills, right, that we had to show them comparison between someone who doesn't like what you're doing and someone who, show them how many people don't like you doing that behavior. And so, like, oh, you think this is easy to teach, but it is not. Neil knows. Really, when hearing people look at us, we have to explain it. They don't just notice those facial expressions and those subtle cues. We have to show it in a different way. We have to, look online and find something. Some people can figure out how to use a VP online or how to do different things. But some people have no soft skills. They can't do that critical thinking to find stuff out. And, we may confuse hearing people. And sometimes we just have to let it go. We have a long way to go in education, right? But sometimes if we act it out, just be comfortable with who you are. If you're the kind of person who really doesn't like to be the drama star, or maybe this this career or this part of this work doesn't work for you. Becoming visual, becoming transparent, letting people see stuff. Neil, come on up. Can I sign from here? Is that all right? So I think the third, the stress vulnerability model, how do you explain that to someone through acting? So we act with these tools. For example, stress. How can we explain stress? Can you taste stress? No, we can't taste stress. We can't eat stress. But we have our different senses, right? We have taste, we have smell. Stress isn't one of those. But let's say we have a balloon and we press on the balloon. You know, they all get this face like, oh gosh, it's gonna pop. Why do they get that face? Why do they back away and get nervous? Because they know it might pop. And stress is exactly the same way. We feel this tension and we want to back away. We get worried. We get nervous about the stress and we get anxious. For example, let's say that you're eating. Let's say you woke up late. And we might ask, what would you do? Maybe you're grouchy because you got up late, right? Got out on the wrong side of bed because you needed some food. So people are like, yeah, I need food. I need energy to work. And I'd say, that's absolutely right. I agree with you. If you haven't eaten your breakfast, it's stressful. That's what stress is. And they say, oh, that's stress? It's like when you get upset and you feel like you have to hit something. That's what leads to that. Oh, I must eat. I must drink water. And then I don't have as much stress. And I can go about my business or my job. That's kind of how I explain that. But you're talking about stress itself, and I get that. That's a great example with the balloon and how stress feels. That's beautiful. But the concept and the model that you're talking about and that theory, do you explain the theory at all? No, we modify that. We do keep these topics, but we don't explain the abstract concepts in this model. So you just talk about stress and what it is and not the theory? That seems very different to just talk about stress and what it is and coping with it. That's kind of what you're talking about, but not this third piece that really is more the theory of it. I guess I'm trying to do the same thing. Right, it doesn't work. The theory part has to be thrown out the window. I think what he's saying is really true. We have to do a lot of modifications. People have said, wow, you changed so much. Is it still evidence-based? And we say, well, what else are we going to do? Nobody else out there has any other adaptations to this program. And you're right. So we make these adaptations to make them more visual, to bring them down to the same level. And I don't mean to bring them down in a negative way, but make them more accessible. Thank you for that sign. If you could stand up in the back, please. You had your hand up. My name is Kathy, and I'm from Canada. And I love that example or the examples that you are making that are showing the role playing. But I'm also curious how, let's say you have a deaf person, how do you know that you're getting it?
It's time. We show them. Yeah, but how do you know they're comprehending? How do you know they truly understand what you're trying to teach them? Okay, thank you. That's coming up next. We're getting there. So thank you. So the question was, how do you know they're actually improving? Go ahead and click to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to do teaching tools first, and then I'll come back to your question. Is that okay? Okay, so this is a list of all the methods that we use. Pictures. Oh, I wish I had brought a flip chart with the pictures. Oh, well. Okay. Anyway, recovery. So we do drawing. We'll have a big piece of paper or something, and we'll have a drawing that says, We'll show the logo, the SLRPC logo. And then we'll have a road with like the yellow dotted lines coming from it. And then over here, we'll have a circle asking you what you want. You want a home, you want a job, you want to be married, you want to have children, you want to have a dog. All of that will be drawn. And we'll ask, where are you now? You want to have a dog? Okay, no, you're not there. You don't have this or you don't have that. Where are you now? And they'll look at the drawing. They say, well, we're down here. And they'll say, yeah, down there. So we start in that SLRPC circle is where you're at now. And then we ask, do you want to stay there? And of course they say, no, I don't want to stay here. And then we ask, do you want to improve? And they'll say, yes, I want to improve. And so how do you transition to where you want to be? And it's following this road, this representation of the road, this journey. And sometimes it can be a very long journey. And so now you have to do the work to travel that road, to make that journey, to get the things that you want. Maybe freedom to move or to be married. And what that looks like is a path of recovery. And so you have to work along this path. And what you have to do is, and then we talk about ideas, you can't hit. That's one thing. You can't swear. All these things that you can't do. And we'll put those on the road and what their journey might look like. If you do this again, what happens? You get placed back into the SLRPC circle. And so it becomes very visual. And I'll do it in ASL. Who knows Missouri? Anybody familiar with the geography of Missouri, what it actually looks like, the state of Missouri? Oh, I can't ask you two. I'm not counting you two in this. So what Missouri looks like is this square with a tail at the bottom, right? And there's the two corners, and then it's flat in the middle. And about here you've got St. Louis, and then down here in this corner you have Joplin. That's where I was born. It's down there in Joplin. And then you come up here to Kansas City, and if you come in from the other side near the border of St. Louis, and then right in the middle is JC, Columbus, JC.
Columbia and Jefferson City.
Thank you. Columbia and Jefferson City. And so then they understand, oh, that's what the state looks like. But the problem is, if they've never seen a map, how would they even understand that? And that's the point, is how you teach someone who has no frame of reference, nothing, no foundation that you can base that on. So when I explained it, they knew exactly what I was talking about, but the poor interpreters were like, what is he talking about? He's not, maybe never seen in Missouri in his life, but am I right? So the interpreter had no frame of reference. And so, and you know, when they're talking about Columbia and Jefferson City, he already knew, and he was able to, he was motivated. And when we work with someone that has nothing, no foundation, you have to try, you're trying to teach them a skill, and they're like, what does that do for me? Get it? Okay, everybody clear? So then the challenges. Yes, the games, sorry. So you're talking about the, sorry, could you move up to the front? Can everybody see me? Oh, come on up here. Okay, so my name is Theo Hildago from Miami. And talking about the scaffolding, you always start from a position where they can comprehend, and then you build upon that foundation, and that's the scaffolding. So we start with something that they can relate to. Is that what you're talking about? That's why I was saying it looks like Adair does a great job, because his presentation was earlier and Neil was before that, and so these presentations have built upon each other. We don't have to explain everything all over again. You can go to a workshop and it will apply to another workshop later on. You can apply. They treat you, they don't treat you like you've never went to college. So thank you. That's a perfect example. You made my point very clear for me. Thank you. Another example. Guys love ASL stories. They love interacting with deaf people. They love it. And Josie was telling me, they can't wait to see you. I was like, really? Really? And they're like, oh no, they're very excited. Trust me. They've been sitting there waiting for me to come in. And if you get there a little bit late, they get mad. They're like, you're late. I was like, I'm sorry, traffic was bad. I have to be on time, right, Josie? They love it. And before that, it was just like they weren't motivated. But I come in and I'm very expressive and use ASL to communicate. So back to the point, an ASL story, one story. I love this story. The boy in the fence. You've heard this story about the boy in the fence? Yes? No? I don't know if you're dead or alive. I need to see some heads nods or shaking your head, something. I don't want to repeat something that you already know because then it's boring. But this seems to be a perfect learning opportunity. So I'm going to tell a story and everybody would watch me and they're like, oh, what is everyone going to say next? And I'm going to get the answer. So I started explaining. I was like, yes, you will enjoy. This is better than a movie. You don't have to go to the movie. You can watch me tell a story. And so I started telling a story in ASL about a boy who was always in trouble. This boy would get in trouble over and over again, and his father would get very upset and angry with him. And he had been kicked out of school, and he'd had a lot of issues. And I would say, oh, you guys have experienced some of that. You're familiar with this experience of being kicked out of school. And this boy is deaf too, just like you. And the father would sign. He was hearing, but he could sign. And I'd make these connections to my participants. And the father had to figure out a way to teach his son to respect boundaries. And so they worked. He was sent to work on the farm. And he said, you're going to have to go and chop wood. And the boy thought, okay, great, sure. And he started chopping wood. And he would go through a log and be done. And he was sweating. He'd worked all day. And the father came and looked at his work and thought, okay, that was good. Why don't you go to bed? Tomorrow, I'll have another assignment for you. And so the son went to bed. And he woke up eager to work. And the father told him, okay, you now have to paint the fence white. And the son said, paint the fence white? He said, yep, paint the fence white. So he started painting the fence. And he worked all day in the hot sun, painting this fence. And when he was all done, the father came and said, okay, good job. So you can go and rest, get some dinner and rest and go to bed. The next day, he said, the son said, am I done? And the father said, nope, there's still more to the fence. The house is in the middle, and the fence wraps around the entire property. And after 2 or 3 days of work, he said, yep, you got to go and finish painting the fence. And so he set about working on building the fence. And then there was another day when he finished that, got the fence completed all the way around the rest of the house. The boy was very proud of his work. He felt very satisfied, and I can see heads nodding and people saying, I did this all myself. I did it, and my students would be like, yes, I can relate to that story, and feeling proud about completing work. And the boy thought his dad should be proud of him. So when the dad arrived, he said, you're right. Now, you're not done. But my last request is I want you to go and fill all of the drill holes in the fence. And the son was like, you want me to drill holes in my beautiful fence? And they disagreed, and they said, no, Irvin, you're wrong. And I said, no, I'm just telling you the story. He wants him to drill holes in the fence. So he went ahead and drilled holes in the fence, all around the fence. And the boy was disgusted. He was like, I worked so hard and now my fence is ruined. He said, it was so dumb of my father to ask me to do that. And so my students are watching the story, and when the father came back, they were all watching to find out what Irvin would say next. And they were very motivated by this story. And I'd say, you know what the father said? He said, you see these holes? It's ugly, right? And the boy said, yes. And the other people participating would say, yes, it's ugly. You know, it was a beautiful fence and now it's ruined. And the father said, when you behave in a way like you hit or you lie or you steal, you're putting holes in people's lives. You put a hole in my heart. I've got all these holes from different behaviors that you're doing, and that's a very destructive. Can you fix that fence? No, it's already been destroyed. The same thing is true of my heart. The behavior that you're displaying affects me. It makes me very sad. You're breaking the rules, and you've broken rules over and over again. Can I trust you again? And all of them had that look of astonishment and realization. And I see you doing that as well. I see that similar look. And that's a very important example, a teaching method using ASL, teaching empathy through ASL story. It's a powerful way to communicate for someone who's linguistically challenged or language challenged. You have the clinician and the knowledge, those two pieces, and put it together. I don't know. I do what I think is best. I have a theatrical background. I used to be a performer and a dancer, and so I can bring that experience with me, and I know how to do that. But that needs to be instilled and taught into other practitioners, because that will help them. That will really make the point. They'll think about the holes in the fence. And I can remind them, remember, the holes, you don't want to make holes in the fence. And they're like, oh, right, okay. And that's something they come up with on their own. All I did was an ASL story. Okay, so there's a list of different methods of teaching. Go ahead and click this to the next slide. How much time we have left? Can I just get a time check? Okay, good. Okay. Now back to, I don't know who it was, they had a question or a discussion, whether it's working or not. And this is something that we, lessons learned. The first time I taught IMR, we realized, like you were saying, we were teaching and it just didn't work. There were struggles and stress. So we had to throw that out. It wasn't working. We had to identify, maybe it was my signing wasn't enough or the concepts weren't clear enough. So we changed it to something else. We got rid of what wasn't working and changed to something else. And it's okay to do that. It's fine to do that. You can't always follow the book exactly. It's not fair to the participants to force them to read and understand all the materials because they can't do it. We didn't know how to measure the outcomes. Who was it that asked about? Yes. We didn't know how to measure that. We passed it out. We thought, okay, we created this with a face and a smile and a face with a frowny. And they would just draw all over the picture. And we were like, oh, it's still not working. There was a direct support worker that would tell us, your story yesterday, we saw improvement from that discussion. They would inform us and let us know what was working, what we used, because with the paper evaluations or self-measurement, we didn't know how to do that. So you can let me know your ideas, but honestly, with this population, having them fill out a paper didn't work. So the SLRPC, we made a lot of mistakes. And if you provide a workshop at the hospital, you have to remember what you can bring into the hospital. So I brought glass with marbles in it. And Josie was like, no, you can't take that into the hospital. You can't do that. And I was like, oh, can't bring a laptop for security reasons. And I was like, oh, so I made many mistakes. So you need to know what you can bring with you and what you can teach. And then you have to make a modification if you experience something where you bring it in and you can't bring it in. So you have to have a lot of tools in your bag and a lot of things to back up what you're going to do.
Emotional literacy is so difficult. It's, but they understand anger clearly because they experience that all the time. That's a common emotion for them. Remorse, though. What is remorse? Maybe confusion. Some of these topics are more abstract thoughts. Maybe I'm sad and happy at the same time. They think, no, that's impossible. What does that even mean? So this can be a big challenge in our process. When you're talking to someone with deafness and other disabilities, we have to do a lot more explaining. Other things, like let's say you're teaching and a person in the group has disengaged. Maybe they were in the process, but now they're not. And so they'll say, oh, I remember Sarah was talking about a roller coaster. And that triggered this person to think about this roller coaster experience and started signing pretty dramatically. And it didn't realize that a roller coaster story would be such a trigger for this person. So we had to kind of let that person tell their story or express themselves and then say, do you realize that you're really off topic right now? And they'd say, oh, I am. And we'd say, are you okay? What can we do for you? And really, this person didn't know that they were so off topic. And so we would, try to use a different story in the future because we realized that this one just didn't work for this person. So it's a challenge. As we're teaching, we have, this strict set of materials we're supposed to follow, but do we follow it or do we meet the needs of the clients? And so that can be a struggle at times. And so it's been a learning process for us. Something I suggest is if you're going to set up IMR yourself, that you do it culturally based. For example, I'm black and Sarah is white, and so we have, and if you have 2 men or 2 women, it might not work. We have to have our diversity. It's really important that we have cultural diversity. Signing, of course, is an absolute requirement for everyone. It wouldn't be good to have one person who has to have an interpreter so that they can use their voice. We need everybody to be able to sign completely in the group and have 100% participation with language. We also just need the global support. I couldn't teach if my administrators didn't support me or my hospital didn't support me or the director of the program. I couldn't do it without the support of all the people involved because I would have to deal with them and all the bureaucracy there. And so I need to just really be able to focus on the group and the program. And if you don't have the support from your supervisor or your administrative team or any of those people, if they're not interested, it's not going to work. Now, I worked at a school for the deaf as a social worker. And I was pretty new. It was like my first job after graduating with my MSW. And I'm like, oh, I'm working at a deaf school. This is amazing. And the DC politics, right? There's politics everywhere. So the problem that I had was I found out that students were smoking weed on campus, or we found out about these different things that were happening. And so the parents would find out, and they would have this huge ruckus. And they wanted us to set up a drug program on campus or something, try to get kids to stop or whatever. And so I didn't really know what to do. But I said, you know what, you need to stop smoking weed. This isn't allowed. You can't do this. And they just laughed at me. And I'm like, well, this is what administration is saying. And I'd go to them and tell administration it's not working. And, they'd say, well, do this couple-week session, and then the parents will be satisfied, and that's good enough. It's important that you provide the training and the education, whether they get it or not. So, wow. I'm going to be a bit vulnerable here, but I trust all of you in this room. I felt like I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. As a social worker, I wasn't able to provide what they needed, and I couldn't deliver it because my administration wouldn't support me. So if you set up IMR and you want to do this without the support, I just tell you don't try. if you don't have the administrative support first, it's not going to work. They are a key part of making this work. They'll give you the resources and all the things you need if they support you. Now, of course, you want to prepare before and after, figure out what works and what doesn't. You also need to do some self-assessments and self-awareness. The other co-facilitator and I have to really look at ourselves. And, we have to know about a criminal history. And
We can't do this without judgment. 'Cause
we can't have any judgment on these people who have criminal history. Sometimes there are religious people involved, and we sit with them. And, we'll say, maybe we have child molesters or whatever, and we have to talk to them about, the impacts of what's happened. Like, I don't judge easy. I don't judge. But sometimes there's just a little facial expression or something. And for me, it was very difficult. So I had to do some self-assessment to not be shocked by some of the behaviors or some of the things that they had done. And Sarah, as a woman, I would say she's attractive. And but she was tough, right? She would come and she'd be cool. She is just this coolest person. And I don't know, will a woman feel comfortable with these 4 guys who are coming to her and just are all just right in her personal space? And Josie and I were standing back, but she was standing up there with them, and she would just be cool with it. And she'd say, I'm going to start class. Could you sit over there? Or could you sit over there? And, I'm thinking inside she was probably a bit nervous with them right there in her face. But so you have to know if you're comfortable with that. If you're not, the clients are going to see it, and they're going to catch you. They're going to eat you alive. So if you're not ready to do it, don't. That's my recommendation. Oh.
Thankful for Neil.
I'm so thankful for Neil. He's given so many workshops and trainings. And, we've paid him to come and do more explanations and help us out with this. But it made a world of difference. Even the executive director being involved, could really get this stuff and why it was important. The cross-cultural stuff, I just can't tell you enough how much it helped us. So if you're thinking about doing this, I really suggest you contact Neil. And I don't know exactly how he runs it, but you could ask him if he could come maybe present, because it helped us tremendously. Someone over here? Hey, did I pay you for that advertisement? Really, I just want to let you know that your descriptions, my life over the last 30 years, I watched deaf people at work. And I'm a good observer. But the examples of your stories and your gut ideas of what to do over the years, I've been writing those things down. And I learn from deaf people. And I can see your natural abilities to do this work. And of course it's in sign language, but there's just a way to show the story while you're teaching. And I've seen that around. But really what I do is I just write down all those things and I reflect them back, and they're awesome. And how you're able to adapt them and how you have to adapt them. We all do that. Is that still IMR? I don't know. Are we following it strictly? Maybe we're not. It doesn't work if we do. So we have to make these revisions and kind of come up with this new product, right? Create something that fits the people we're working with. We all do that. I don't know really that that's IMR. I think it's something else. I think it's deaf mental health is what it is. Well, I don't know how else to develop and modify this stuff. We just have to do our best to find something that works. Can you say your name and where you're from? My name is Amy, and I am from Georgia. And I think just like what Neil said, we have that deaf gut that we know what we're going to do and how to make it work. But just something you said was that what's most important is to have similar communication. So if you're doing one-on-one or with a group, how do you make sure that happens? Yeah, I didn't explain that early. Thanks for catching that. So we had 6 people, and there was one that wasn't motivated, so we had other issues. So we had 5 left. And then, we noticed somebody was just getting behind. And so they would smile at me, and I would start to try to talk to that person. And I'd say, what? They'd be confused. They wouldn't know what we were doing. The person was language delayed enough that they couldn't follow it at all. And so, we tried pictures of family members, pictures of this and stuff. And that, when we worked with that person one-on-one, that person was able to make great gains. They got a lot better in a one-on-one environment. And it seemed like they were doing better. And so after, then they knew even the days of the week. When they first started, they didn't even know what the days of the week were. So we realized that person needed one-on-one treatment. And so as you go through this, you'll see where those needs are. If I have everybody in a group and I proceed, I can see, this one isn't getting it with a group, and I'll have to pull them out aside, and that's just what we did. I don't know if I answered your question adequately. Any other questions? Well, I beat it. I have 20 minutes left, and here we go. Is anybody having another question? Please tell us your name and where you're from. People want to see you, if you could go. Thank you. My name is Joni Teague, and I'm from California, San Francisco, and I work for DCCA, the Deaf Community Counseling Services. I'm deaf myself, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, just like you, so yay. There's not a lot of us out there, so it's so exciting to meet another deaf person with the same credentials. So it's so great to have this workshop. I work with so many customers with so many varying different abilities. And so, I'm just thinking, oh, wow, which clients am I going to use your stories with next week? And I'm wondering, how do you come up with those kind of stories? And I guess my challenge is to find the right story that tells the right message. And I think stories have a very powerful way of bypassing this linear thinking and get to the root of something. So I want to know your secret, how you're coming up with these. And these metaphors, I think a lot of people use metaphors in ACT therapy, and they'll tell their story, and it'll have a great impact on deaf people because it's an ASL. Thank you. It's so great to have your advocacy and support of my work as well. I think it comes from life experience. I just have to use my own experiences sometimes. I grew up in a family of hearing people. My parents, the doctor told my parents, don't teach him how to sign, leave him alone, blah, blah, blah. So I had no way of learning behavioral norms. And what saved me, and I don't really know how, because, I know I could end up like my clients without any of that exposure. So what saved me is that I love to read. And so I read, and I went to my deaf friends, and I would tell them the stories, the fantasies that I read. And I just did that my whole life. So when I think about, I remember when I was little, this happened. Here's a little secret. It's kind of humorous because there was a day that I was telling a story, and I didn't know this client very well, but they said, we went to the same school. And I was like, oh my goodness, we went to the same school. He remembered the story that I was telling. So way back when he was little, he remembered that. So it's important to find that and find your strength. Not everybody can do it like I do it. But that doesn't mean you have to do it my way. You need to find your own strengths. Find out what works for you. And for me, stories just help me. You have to remember also that in St. Louis, it's very oral philosophy based. And so deaf jokes aren't as funny there. Maybe because it's done in SimCom or whatever method they're using. But I knew that these men, they were straight men who liked women, and they wanted a relationship with their fathers. They wanted some kind of father relationship. So I knew that those kind of things would work. You have to know your clients, and so you have to know what their values are to help them develop the stories that are going to connect to them. If I were to talk about a girl who was a fairy or something, like that's not going to work. They're not going to care about those kind of stories. They're going to be like, they're going to just check out. But they're kids they were people who really wanted a relationship with their father, so they would get those experiences. So when I told the story about the father and the fence, that really helped a lot. I hope that answered your question.
Nice job. And I want to thank the interpreters for their patience with me and everything. And I want to thank you for pushing the button and flipping the slides. Other questions over here? Come on up. Wow, that story. There was one, I think, more and more people are creating and using ASL stories, and I've seen other people do it, and then your story is like a film, and then another person's story, and trying to keep a record of that. I'm collecting our teaching stories and coming up with a way to share those. There's this person has one, that person has one. There's a lot of these stories, but we don't have the resources to collect those stories where we can access them. Same, we have to develop another story. At the Rochester Recovery Center, they're teaching with stories as well. Everything is done with stories, and we need like a vlog, or now we have DVDs and vlogs. Like that story that you just signed is precious. So we have to capture that and record it. I could sell it. You really could sell it. You could market that. And so if you've got 10 teaching stories like that and produce a DVD to sell, people would buy it. People would buy that DVD. Well, thank you. Thank you. More questions? I can't see. Okay. I think we've got 10 minutes left, but anyway, thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. And like I said, we don't have all the answers. But I hope that, and like Neil said, something that came up, you've come up with an idea. If we could collaborate and work together, I don't know. This is just the beginning. And I'm hoping that you leave and you go back to your agencies and you bring this experience with you. It creates some dialogue. My contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to contact me. I think this will benefit a lot of people, and I think I agree with you. We have a lack of resources, and there's no reason why we can't reach out to each other. So have a great day.